Hey, Efrain, thanks so much for joining us on the call. And you have a unique position, and that is you're the director of the Recalibrate Conference. And the PLC call has now been joined in with Recalibrate. And so, as you're the director of the Recalibrate Conference, what is your goal for those who participate in the Recalibrate Conference?
The Recalibrate Conference, it is a conference that focuses on leadership development, equipping leaders and pastors to be able to realign their mission with God's mission. Because let's face it, throughout a given year, mission shifts, mission drifts, vision leaks, and passion chills for whatever reason. I mean, we as leaders in the church, we're faced with a lot of different dynamics from cultural dynamics, political dynamics, to just different. There are things that come our way as church leaders that change our alignment for some reason or the trajectory of where we're going. And so it's important to get together and then recalibrate, realign our mission with God's mission. God gave us a mandate to go and make disciples of all nations, right? And so we see it in Matthew 28, the Great Commission, and we are to live it out in love. And so in the church world, we can so easily, as leaders, lose sight of that. We can lose sight of this great commission that Jesus gave us. And so, if we are not in alignment with that great commission to reach those who are far from God with the good news of Jesus Christ, then everything else we do will just drift away and we'll lose sight of just being that catalyst to make double kingdom impact.
Mm. I was as you're talking, it made me think a little bit about the fact that I just had to have the brakes in my car replaced, and they put new brake pads on, and they were just like, hey, by the way, before we put these brake pads on, your rotor, particularly one on the right side, is worn out, and so we can put one new rotor in, or better yet, put both of them in, and all new brakes, and then everything helps the car run better. And it's a recalibration that was taking place, and wear and tear matters. But do you know why it was that I went to the brake shop? It's because I heard that grind, and that
Uh,
grind of things being out of alignment was what was really driving me crazy. And it also told me there was a real big problem. I think we have churches all across the world that struggle with trying to stay in constant alignment, and they feel that the grind, and they're wondering what's out of place or what's wrong. So I appreciate what you're doing with the Recalibrate conference. But man, let's just be honest. Why a podcast? Why are we wanting to tie the PLC call that we've been doing for a number of years that in with the Recalibrate conference? How is it that you envision this podcast being a part of the Recalibrate process for pastors and congregational leaders?
Yeah, the goal for us is to equip leaders, staff members, board members, just leaders across the church. And so for us, I think a key component of that is producing content that will be released on a regular basis. And something too, we're living a day and age where everybody's busy. For us, on demand is something that is very convenient for church leaders who are doing multiple things. Maybe it's a bivocational leader. Maybe you're working multiple jobs and you only get a certain amount of time to really get some leadership content. And so we want to be able to make it available and accessible different times throughout the week, so that a leader can go on and listen, whether they're mowing the lawn or they're cooking food or driving their kids to an activity or an event, or maybe they're just traveling and they want to put on the podcast station in order to get leadership context. So I think part of the process of equipping is that we're being intentional and proactive in making leadership content available for all of our leaders that they could have access to at any point.
So you're not trying to take the place of a book or a seminar or a college or university setting. You're looking at, hey, we're living busy lives, and sometimes we need a little background noise, a little background meditation, maybe something just to kind of help us, subconsciously and maybe even consciously, or maybe it's the other way around, consciously and maybe even subconsciously, get into alignment or stay on course in the direction that we're moving in. Now, as you think about looking ahead as to what this podcast, this on-demand service is going to be providing, what are some things, maybe some areas of the church life that pastors and congregational leaders need to be thinking about? What do you hope to have discussed in this kickoff of the Recalibrate PLC call?
Yeah, I think making things practical for the pastor and their leaders, so that they can have discussions during their staff team meetings or their leadership meetings. We're going to look at different topics such as how do we reach those who are far from God, specifically the next generation. And so I know that at the Recalibrate conference, we had a panel discussion and we had some breakout sessions where we were able to make available content where we can really begin talking and discussing of ways that we as leaders could equip our people to reach the next generation. Because let's face it, our churches aren't getting, our church leaders aren't getting any younger, and for us, there is a huge disconnect between the younger generation and the church. However, we're seeing reports and pockets of universities where they're experiencing great revival. There's also reports that the next generation is hungry for God. So, how do we, in the local church level, connect the dots? How do we bridge the gap of reaching those in our community that are not connected to a local church, and invite them into a relationship with God that will lead them to a biblical community? Because we all know the benefits of biblical community. So, how do we reach the next generation in our context, in our community, in our school districts, and then there's other topics that I think will be very beneficial for us as leaders is pipeline. How do we create a leadership pipeline that can really help us be effective in ministry? How can we connect with those in our context? It's very key, and so we'll discuss different ways that we can do that, best practices that are out there, and just bring about a good dialogue and discussion that will be able to help our teams.
Yeah, I think about how, the next generation rising up, if we reach them, then we're left with the question of what do we do with them?
Yeah.
We bring them into, the church setting or bring them into a discipleship relationship and, they grow. Then what do we do? And so that question of the pipeline, the question related to, how do we help people find their niche? I think those are important things to wrestle with. A few years back, I was working through some material that proposed that the 12 disciples who Jesus had selected to follow after him may have all been under the age of 25, right? And so we know Jesus was like 33, when he dies, and so it's 30 when he's starting to select them, and that all those that he selected, were likely under the age of 25, maybe even under the age of 20. And that was such a like a brain moment for me. Am I just like, because I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, all the pictures I see of the disciples who walked with Jesus, they're like all these old men with big beards and salty skin from spending out time out on the sea, to think that it's possible, and this author was arguing a high probability the people Jesus is entrusting the church to, the people he's using for the first building of the church, are they what would have been at that time considered children, but is the younger generation, and it's not the older ones that are he's seeking to grow the church with. That was a huge hit for me, of one, confirmation of kind of the ministry that I've done through the years, but two, this aspect of like, got to keep going young, got to keep at this in the young capacity. So as you think about, the aspects of maybe talking more about reaching the young, what is it that, maybe as I don't know, a dad of two teenagers and one preteen, what is it that you have kind of hope for the church as it relates to the rising generation?
Yeah, I think engagement is huge. Like, as a church leader, we know the importance of making disciples. That's what we're called to do. And the big thing for us is, are we making disciples in our homes, starting with our spouse and then also with our kids. So as we invest in the next generation in our homes, that's a good leadway. That's a good starting factor in order for us to move forward in making disciples in the community. So I see the current needs of our teens and our young adults on a daily basis, because I have, two of them in my home, but also hear stories about their friends, right? That are struggling, who don't have a relationship with Jesus, that would benefit from community in a local context, right? And so we talk about ways to engage with them and encourage them and share the love of Jesus, right? So it first starts in the home, and then it leads out into the community.
Mm. I think that's, the key thing for us to always keep in mind, and it's oftentimes maybe even where recalibrate is necessary to remind us that, hey, the home is where a lot of this starts, and how we interact and carry on in the home influences the conversations that we're going to have outside the home. And maybe one of the big recalibrate pieces that we need to have is just a personal heart check,
Yeah.
and kind of aligning in that direction there. So we talked a little bit about the pipeline piece, or this idea of raising up young people to be able to take into leadership. Just as you survey things from your position and a director of a multiple church conference, the Recalibrate Conference, what is it that you see or are concerned about as it relates to the place for young leaders to serve in the church, and maybe even the position of some established leaders?
Yeah, I think uh, our churches, if we're not careful, there are some churches that can say, well, because we don't have young people, we can't reach them. And so I think if we're not careful, we could fall into that trap, into thinking that we can't reach that next generation. And so I think it's important to come alongside some of those leaders and encourage them and say, hey, there are ways where we can be active in the community, whether it's a mentoring program, maybe it's partnering with the local school district, where we could really be active in the next generation, build relationships, and invite them into a relationship with Jesus. But the pipeline, leadership pipeline, is very important because it is something that for us is going to help us move the gospel forward. In 2 Timothy 2:2, the Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy, and he said, I need you to find reliable leaders that you could entrust the good news, and teach them what I taught you, right? And so that we can continue to move the gospel from a shack in Galilee to churches all across 2,000 years later, to churches all across the United States and globally, right? But it's this process of always looking in our groups, in our small groups, in our churches, always asking the question, who is it that God has sent us right here in our local context? Who is it that God has called to leadership? And always having this eyes open and seeing, who do I need to be investing in? Who can I ask to be an apprentice? Who can I entrust with the greatest news of all, that will be able to, man, and raise up and entrust others so that we could share the gospel to and make a difference. So it's this idea of having that 2 Timothy 2:2 biblical calling to find reliable leaders. And I truly believe that every church has leaders. Every church has reliable leaders. God has sent every single one of our churches leaders that He has called us to invest in, to raise up, to develop, to train, so that the work of the gospel can not only go out into our communities, but also into the next generation and beyond. Because if we don't invest in future leaders, the church will die. So,
Efrain, as I was thinking about what you're sharing here, I'm reminded of back, some 4 years ago when you were starting a new church, and you're not just a conference leader or director, but you're actually still pastoring, and you just moved into a new facility, I know, and some pretty cool stuff going on there. But I recall one of the statements that was associated with some of the material that you were putting out there was that a church for every child,
That's right.
something along that lines. And I just thought, man, that really, kind of captures a sentiment that we need to have. And I know that that was something that I think was part of the group that was helping launch you into the church that you were leading. But this dynamic of, like, do we think of children, needing church, or are we tending to think of just that, older people need church, or that we just need churches in communities, or do we even, just need churches for a family, rather than recognizing it's a child? Every child needs a church.
It is a powerful concept until every child has a church, right? We will continue on with the mission of starting new churches, of revitalizing churches, of yeah, restarting churches so that we can reach every child in the community. If you think about it, those children will end up becoming young adults, and from young adults, adults, right? And so, for us, it's starting early and having that mindset of reaching those who are far from God. And children, young adults are very they're open to the gospel at an early age. It is said that 80% of the people who are reached with the gospel are done between the ages of 7 and 14. So it's around those years that we must be intentional in investing in that next generation. They are our future leaders, and future pastors, future planters, future individuals that will be able to make a difference in the world around us.
This is all connected to recalibrate, and that since sometimes we can drift off course. We talk about how you just articulated that, greater than 80% of people who make a decision for faith currently are doing so during their adolescent years. That makes me go, wait a second. So much of what we do as church is built around adult interests and adult needs. And in many cases, a children's program or a youth program may get second or third level attention in a church's program because, well, I mean, let's just be honest. One of the great challenges that churches face is finances. And so that financial dynamic is at play, and we got to keep the adults happy so that way they give the money, I guess. I don't know. I mean, just kind of pushing a little bit on maybe some of the things that we need to recalibrate and kind of restructure. I know you're leading a church in addition to leading this conference for Recalibrate. Um, can you talk just a little bit about how your church was able to, move into a new facility and really, find a way to make a place for children a priority?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think it starts with a vision and values. If the vision is set in place and you begin to share that vision, people will be able to follow that vision. Without vision, my people perish. So, if part of your value system is the next generation, whether it's students, kids ministry, youth, young adult, then dollars will back your values. So what you value, you will invest in. If you don't value children, if you don't value kids, if you don't value youth or students, you could tell a lot of a congregation based on where the budget funds are going towards. And so, you have to look at that and then make an intentional decision to say we're gonna value students, so we're gonna push resources towards it to be able to help reach the community. And so it's been great to be able to move into this new facility. It's in a great location, and so we've been able to just partner with the local school district, and also have a kids ministry, a children's ministry, and man, we have a great team that also leads a young adult ministry. And you could see that next generation really is hungry for Jesus. And if we provide resources, if we provide a space for them, to come, they will come, and we'll be able to reach them, so that they can learn about the greatest news of all, right? The gospel message of Jesus Christ. And so it's important to really have a vision for that in order for values and resources to be aligned towards that vision.
I'm going to make a shameless plug here, and that is that quite simply, if you want to get a glimpse as to the vision that Efrain is helping to lead in his local church, then you need to come to the Recalibrate Conference in November, because it just happens to be occurring at their church, Wake Church in Conroe, Texas. That'll be in early November. So just kind of be looking for some information as we put it out there. But it's coming, and you can get a glimpse as to how that plays out. I'll share with you a quick thing that we've started at my congregation. In my congregation, we have a high value on children and reaching the unreached. And so what we decided to do is we're partnering with another church to begin offering parenting classes in both English and Spanish. Now we have a good chunk of children and families that are part of my congregation as it is, and we could settle and we could be content there. But instead, we've decided that there are still more to be reached. I think recently I kind of did the math and saw something along the lines of that there's like 350,000 congregations across the United States, and that the population of the last census was like 340 million people. So that means that each congregation needs to do something like reach 900 different people in order to reach every person in our culture or in the United States today. But then in 5 years, with the way that population is exploding, they're expecting that to change to where each congregation is going to have to reach like 1,200 people. Now, that doesn't mean that 1,200 people are coming for worship. It just means that we're ministering to that many people. And that convicted my heart, convicted my leadership team. And so my leadership team stepped in and said, we're going to start providing parenting classes. So we did our first parenting class here last week, and we'll be having some more as we go. And we had over 50 adults show up for this parenting class, and that was pretty impressive for us. We were kind of blown away, and we're doing it in English and in Spanish because we have the resources to be able to do that. But then, and in conjunction with that, when we were planning it, we had to think, well, if we're going to do a parenting class, who's going to take care of the kids? What's going to happen with the kids? And so we had 50 adults and we had 23 children present for this. And so between the people who were participating and the kids that were there, and the adult or the team that was helping produce this, we had like 80 people show up for this event. But
That's fantastic. I think that's an example of investing in yeah, the next generation, families with kids, and so that's wonderful.
and what are maybe some other things that you think are places that the church needs a little bit of recalibration on, and maybe some topics that aren't necessarily slated for an upcoming conference or a past conference, but things that maybe will arise. I mean, something that comes to my mind is just like not only do we have leadership development and next generation, but how do we deal with issues of social good, and where does that fit into our ministry?
But yeah, I think in our context, we're all facing different societal pressures of, there's a lot of conflict in the local community, whether it's racial tension, whether it's political tensions, or whether it's injustices that are happening across our towns, our cities. So it's important for us to lean into and not forget the love of Jesus, right? Jesus called his church to not only make disciples who make disciples, but also, man, love like he loves. And so that's loving people from all different backgrounds and ethnicities. That's loving people who don't look like you, dress like you, talk like you, smell like you, use the same kind of cologne that you do, or have or vote in a different a political party than you do. And so for us, we are to lean into the love of Jesus, and how do we live out love but in truth, right? Speaking truth,
Mm.
sharing truth in love as we engage those around us, whether it's in our businesses, local school districts, communities, neighborhoods. How do we lean into that and not lose sight of it? It's important to be proactive in just changing the trajectory in our communities and making a difference in our communities as we love as we lead with love instead of oftentimes making a point. Sometimes we get so caught up in just making a point, standing on a point, making sure people understand what we're against, and putting, just, we say we want to stand on truth, but oftentimes it comes out as hate if we're not careful by our stance, our posture. But how can we lead in our communities, in our context, with love, right? It's this, and then you also have this concept of mobilizing the church, right? Mobilizing the 99 to reach the one, right? There are people who don't know Jesus around you. So how do we do that? But then do it in a way where we're loving like Jesus.
Yeah, I'm loving what I'm hearing here because it sounded like, if we were to kind of just catchphrase what a place of recalibration would be, that we need to recalibrate our posture because we've been too fixated on our position.
Mm.
So that sense in which you said, hey, we're trying to make a point and we've got our position on an issue, but our position and our point are detrimental because our posture is coming across in the wrong way. And so maybe we need to do a little recalibration in our posture.
And going back and just to make sure people understand is we stand firm in our biblical conviction in the Word of God, right? Our convictions are true to God's word. Like we live a life that is conducive to being obedient to God. But how we engage with the culture and the community around us should not be one of confrontation, arguing, and fighting, but one of the fruit of the Spirit. When Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you, we should love like him. How did Jesus love? He sacrificed, he loved, he forgave, he went the extra mile. He had conversations with people. He spoke truth in love. He led by example, right? It wasn't this, hey, you got to do this or that or the other. It was this posture of love, standing in truth, standing in biblical conviction, but we are loving like Jesus.
Yeah, man, that's powerful stuff right there. I think too many of us, we believe that the kingdom of God expands through war, and we miss that the kingdom of God expands through compassion, and that it's His kindness that drew us in. And so maybe the way that we're going to reach the unreached is when we are kind and we draw them in, just as the kindness of God drew us in. So, man, that's some good stuff right there to kind of really think about, as we process. And this, I mean, this goes back to what you were driving at the beginning with, the Recalibrate conference idea. And that is that we have so many things that are coming at us, so many different ways that we're wrestling with things that sometimes, vision leaks and mission drifts and passion chills, that we need these moments where we kind of come together and rethink through some things and just make sure that we're not veering unintentionally off course. And I think that that's probably more often than not what happens. I think of the book that Larry Osborne wrote a few years ago called The Accidental Pharisee.
Yeah.
And in that book, he's talking about how, most people today are not setting out to be the equivalent of the religious Pharisees of Jesus's day, but by our behavior and our actions, we have become them. And so it's just kind of this sense in which we have to be more mindful of how we're engaging. And that means we have to, I think, submit ourselves to the fact that we could use a tune-up. We could use some recalibration.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
so
right.
that's some good stuff. Hey, as we kind of kind of bring this call to a close, what from your perspective maybe are some books or some resources, maybe even some other podcasts that are out there that
Yeah.
you would recommend people to kind of take a listen to, or crack open the spine of, or subscribe to, so that it hits their email box?
Yeah.
Any resources you want to
Yeah,
recommend
I
right
would.
now? One last question for you, and this one is just kind of maybe a little trivia bit for us, because we want to know a little bit more about this Efrain Cirilo, or Efrain Cirilo, depending on which language you prefer to speak. If you could spend 15 minutes with any currently living leader, who would you want to sit down with next week, and why? You could spend 15 minutes with anybody who's currently alive. So we're not going back in time. I'm sorry, I don't have the time travel machine.
Yeah, yeah,
I know how much you love the
yeah.
Avengers and those sort of things, but we can't
Well,
do any time travel.
yeah,
But if you could sit down with somebody right now, and it could be somebody who is in the Christian community, or it could be somebody in the business community, somebody, it doesn't matter who. We're not going to judge you. We just want to kind of get a sense. If you could sit down with 15 minutes,
yeah.
who would you sit down with?
Yeah, sure. Man, if you would have said somebody that have gone and passed, that was an easier answer. Because I just love the Apostle Paul, his writings, his teachings, and just his leadership. But right now, currently, I would say, I would say Craig Rochelle. I would love to, 15 minutes. Just sit down with him. I'll have a list of questions. So because leaders should always be in the posture of receiving. Not only are you giving and serving others, but you are learning and receiving as well. And so you want to look at that concept of leadership. So every leader, I don't care who you are, and how many years you have been doing it, should have a mentor, should have a coach, should have somebody that is pouring into them, and you should be doing the same. So every Paul has a Timothy, every Timothy has a Paul type of idea. I'm a big proponent of that. But yeah, just to sit down for 15 minutes, that would be the person I would pick up the phone and call
Man, I
to
was
do.
really hoping you were going to say, like, Dave Filoni, who's doing the Star Wars stuff, and you're kind of give us that, like, personal. But I get it, Craig. Hey, look,
Yeah.
Craig is amazing. I've had the opportunity to sit in conferences with him. Efrain, obviously, you are a man who's focused, and I imagine that happens because you have a lot of moments in your life where you got to pause and recalibrate. So thanks for taking a moment to share with us and how it is that the Recalibrate Conference is something that we can be looking forward to and be a part of, but also how this resource of a new, new podcast, new video series, whatever you want to call it, is out there. So that way people can continue to engage in recalibrating, even maybe just kind of as they're driving along from point A to point B. So thanks so much, man. Appreciate your time today. Go forth out there and keep us calibrated in the right direction.
That's right. Well, thank you, Malcolm, for your time. I appreciate you and looking forward to what this year has for us.